Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is holding a news conference this morning on the Flight 752 disaster. The Canadian government is calling for an independent criminal investigation into what went wrong. Iran admits that its forces mistakenly shot down the Ukraine International Airlines passenger jet last week. 57 Canadians were among the 176 people killed when the plane exploded in flames and crashed. Ukraine, Britain, Sweden, and Afghanistan also have victims in the disaster. Now, they're joining in Canada's call for the investigation. Their foreign ministers were hosted by François-Philippe Champagne yesterday at Canada House in London. Champagne says they also want Iran to take full responsibility for the disaster, cooperate in compensation talks, and give consular officials unrestricted access to help victims, families who have traveled to Iran. A spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry is pushing back this morning, saying that the Iranian government is cooperating with Canadian officials and warns that Canada should avoid turning the disaster into a political issue. So Iran's supreme leader is also speaking about the Flight 752 disaster for the first time since Iran admitted to mistakenly shooting down that plane. Rebecca Collard joins us now with more from Beirut. So, Rebecca, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei gave a sermon at Friday morning prayers in Tehran, and it was the first time he's done that in nearly a decade. So let's start with his comments on the plane crash.
Yeah, Arthi, as you said, this is the first time in 8 years that he has given a sermon like this. And I think that really indicates this sort of pressure that the Iranian government feels it's under, both from inside and outside of the country. So he said less about the plane crash than I think many expected. He called it sad and tragic. And said that it could never be repeated, and called for unity among Iranians. But he very quickly segued into saying that, Iran's enemies, and clearly pointing at the U.S., then we're going to use this plane crash. We're using this plane crash to try to weaken Iran, to try to weaken the Iranian military. And I think, Arthi, that was a reference to the protests, the days of protests we saw across Iran after the government admitted that it was, in fact, the Iranian military that shot down that Ukrainian passenger jet, killing 176 people, and as we've said, 57 Canadians among them. So, tragic mistake. He didn't call for this sort of accountability and responsibility that we've heard from Iran's other political leadership, namely the country's president. So, a few comments about it, but not as much, I think, Arthi, as we would have thought he would say about it this morning during these Friday prayers.
Rebecca, since Iran admitted to shooting down the plane, we've also seen days of protests in Tehran and other cities. So Iran is also in a deepening dispute with Europe. Did Khamenei have anything to say on that front?
Yeah, Arthi, he really used the majority of this sermon to, first of all, praise Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general that was killed by the U.S. earlier this month, that really set off all of these tensions, but also to lash out at both the U.S. and Europe. So the lashing out against the U.S., I think we've seen it so many times from Iran. This time he was saying that, the U.S., when it pretends to stand with Iranian people, it really has poisonous motivations for that. And it talked about the fact that this showed that the assassination of Qasem Soleimani showed the U.S.'s terrorist nature. But interestingly, he also lashed out against the European powers. And I think that has to do, of course, with this 2015 nuclear deal, which now really seems to be on its last legs, as the European powers that are involved in that pact essentially have triggered the dispute mechanism, which is really putting this agreement at risk. And we've heard from for the last few days from Iran's political leadership, from the country's president, the country's foreign minister, that they want to preserve this agreement. But it sounds like the European powers don't think, or at least are worried that might not be possible. So really what we saw mostly today was him lashing out against the European powers, as you said, but also against the U.S.
All right. Thanks for the latest on this, Rebecca. That's freelance reporter Rebecca Collard in Beirut.